Vjaceslavs Dombrovskis, Latvia's Minister of Economics, joins Dukascopy TV for an exclusive interview to discuss the effectiveness of the sanctions against Russia and what does the Russian-Ukrainian situation mean for Latvia, the newest member to the Eurozone. Minister Dombrovskis, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure. Now, the topic that we would like to focus on today is the effectiveness of sanctions against Russia and what does it mean for Latvia. So the first question, to your mind, how successful have these sanctions against Russia been so far, taking into account that Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev stated, and I quote, "The effect of sanctions on the Russian economy is absolutely minimal if you can talk about any effect at all."
Okay, I think I will maybe paraphrase your question into this one anecdote when, say, Einstein is asked about what is the effect of the French Revolution. I think he pauses and then answers, oh, it's too early to tell. So I think the answer here is exactly the same. It's too early to tell. The purpose of sanctions of any sort is deterrence. So whether there had been an effect of deterrence or not, is not something that we can, I think, judge or see at the moment. Because we are effectively then asking the question, or would, let's say, Russia go further than it would have in, first of all, the presence of sanctions, and second of all, if it believes that tougher sanctions are a real possibility.
Okay, and at the moment, the EU has imposed certain sanctions against Russia, targeting people and businesses, mainly with travel bans as well as asset freezes. However, under what conditions would the EU and Latvia, of course, be ready to commence imposing tougher economic sanctions?
Well, first of all, Latvia does not and will not impose the unilateral sanctions of its own. That is a decision that's made by the European Union, and Latvia is one of the 20+ countries that's participating in the decision. I would say that clearly if there are clear and clearly interpretable steps from Russia to escalate the present conflict with Ukraine, then that would most likely be basically a trigger for further tougher sanctions.
Okay, and in one of the interview, Minister, you have mentioned that in case tougher sanctions are imposed against Russia, Latvia will be the most affected country in the European Union. And in May, Latvia's Finance Minister, Vilks, he has stated that in the event of new sanctions, Latvia will not be able to grow at the rate of 4%, as initially estimated in the beginning of the year. So the question is, considering Latvia's strong export reliance on Russia, is Latvia now looking for new partners in order to broaden its export destinations? And if so, what are those potential new markets?
Well, I did indeed make this remark, and it does not take a PhD of being the Minister of Economy to conclude, looking at the simple statistics, that in terms of trade and transit and tourism, Russia is one of our biggest trade partners in relative terms. So that is not a surprise, given that Russia is our close neighbor. There is a large Russian-speaking minority in Latvia, which of course means that there is substantial trade with the country next door. And of course, in relative terms, that exposure is much bigger than for, say, Germany or France or Spain or other European countries. That is just a fact of life. As regarding the reorientation of experts, we are not, of course, a command and control economy, so we cannot tell our businesses to sell here or there. And even for businesses, of course, it's a matter of the flexibility as to how much they can do it. Some businesses can, possibly, and there has been quite a lot of reorientation of trade over the last 20 years. When 20 years ago, Russia was the biggest, by far, trading partner. Now Russia's role has somewhat diminished to the third largest trade partner of Latvia. But say for some sectors, maybe I'll mention something that's called sproti. That's a kind of a canned fish, where let's say from the brand point of view, this Sproti is something that's very familiar. I can see it by your smile to any, say, a post-Soviet person. So it has developed a sort of a brand which does not quite exist to a similar extent to, let's say, in France or Spain or in Germany, right? So where you rely in your sales on, say, the brands which come from the Soviet times, so which are much stronger, of course, in Russia and the other post-Soviet countries, then of course you cannot reorient that quickly or that successfully, and maybe not at all.
Okay, and finally, Russia has recently signed a 30-year gas deal with China that is estimated to be worth $400 billion US. So consequently, to some extent, this decreases Russia's energy export reliance to Europe. However, what does this deal mean for Europe and Latvia being important gas markets for Russia?
Well, that one is again a bit too early to tell. Latvia, for example, has a gas contract until 2030, which is a long-term one. Russia has so far been a very reliable supplier. We have not experienced any problems over since the independence. Even though, of course, we look with certain dismay at what's happening in Ukraine, where there's been both the price fluctuations and the threats of disruption, and so on. I so far don't have any reasons to think that somehow the supplies as such would be under threat, even though of course there might be price developments that would also depend on what the demand would be at the time when the pipeline will be built, what is the agreed price with China, as I suspect it might be, and most likely it is lower, even though I have no, of course, reliable information on that, than the price at which the gas is sold to Europe. So if that is the case, if the price for natural gas in Europe is higher than what the contract says, well, I don't know what it says, but what according to the contract it is with China, then of course that's a commercial motivation for Russia to continue to sell to Europe as a priority market.
Well, that was Vjaceslavs Dombrovskis, Latvia's Minister of Economics, who talked about the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian situation on Latvia. For more exclusive interviews and top headlines, keep watching Dukoscopy TV.